Last year we held the conference, as you heard from Tim, in London, and what pleased me most probably about that entire conference was at least 3 people came up to me and said with real deep feeling that it was the most meaningful conference they'd ever attended in their lives. And I think that was because it was about solutions and collaboration and uniting team humanity, etc. And that was wonderful. And I think it's getting even better as we go, and we're going to have a better conference now. It gives me great pleasure to formally open this and speak to you as leaders of the world, which you really are, and I think you're beginning to understand that. If I had to describe myself, it wouldn't be as a light-hearted person. I tend to be terribly serious all the time, my whole life. I'm sure you know that. And so constantly I'm worrying about the state of the world and where it's going and so on and so forth. And what I want to do in this brief opening is really cut to the chase on a global scene. It's in keeping with everything we're doing here. There is so much confusion in the world, so many confusing views from very genuine people. It doesn't matter whether you're looking at how to deal with drugs or terrorism or agriculture and what's going on in agriculture, or the incredible, appalling poaching of rhino and elephants that we're seeing in Africa, or how you deal with starving mothers and children. We have all these conflicting views about these symptoms of really environmental degradation on a global scale. So I want to cut right through on that. We all know the position that we have a world population rising from 7 billion towards 10 billion. When we look at that population of ours, and don't think of our choir, which is expanding, but which is tiny and minute in the world, billions of those people are just having a great party. And it's carry on the party. And it's all based on technology and better entertainment and the stock markets and whatever's happening. And then you have a couple of billion people in that who are suffering and dying as we speak. And in terrible conflicts and in boatloads of people drowning, trying to reach Europe and so on. And then you have a small handful of a few million, if we're lucky, who are really beginning to see reality and want to take action, meaningful action. That's what's wonderful to follow somebody like yourself, feeling that passion as a young person, as I did 60 years ago. And it was that passion I had in me, and I love to see it coming in young people now. Now, we only need few facts to see who's realistic in this. The folks that want to carry on the party, which is most of us in the world, or those that are calling for some realistic action. And the 3 simple facts are unfortunately not known to most people in cities. And most of our population has now gone to cities for the first time in the history of the world. And to the cities has gone all the control, the political control, financial control of everything that used to be in balance to some extent with rural populations. Now, these simple facts are, first, that all human endeavor depends upon the soil, a living soil and the soil life, rather than smart technology. No smart technology in the world can sustain all human endeavor. Soil does. The second one is the one that was put up here as a quote from me, that the only economy that can sustain any community, nation in the long term ultimately is derived from green growing plants, essentially, growing on regenerating soils. Now, this also includes green plants converting energy in the sea, etc., but for most of it, it's coming from the land. Now, the third fact that indicates whether the partygoers or the realists or the action people are the realists is when we look at the soil and our current practices. our current practices in agriculture, not just industrial agriculture, all of agriculture, our current practices are leading to well over 75 billion tons of soil dead, destroyed, and eroding every year. Now, that's a figure we can't grasp. So that represents 20 times as much food as we need per human alive, for every human alive today. In other words, that's about 10 tons of dead eroding soil for every human, when we need about half a ton of food for a year for a human. That is a shocking statistic. So you put these three things together and you see that the people that are wanting to take realistic action are the ones that we need to be getting through to and expanding. Now, is this happening on the bigger scale? No, not. If we look at the United Nations, we've had the millennial goals that have not achieved much, and now we've just had announced new global sustainability or global sustainable development goals. And from what I can see, and I've read as much as I can about that quickly, everything in that is addressing symptoms of environmental degradation with nothing going towards addressing the root cause of the problem. Now, here is where we come in and can offer such hope to the world. This is where we come in. Now, how do we come in? When we look at the global situation, right, we can see it fairly well from this NASA picture, and everything that we see in brown or tinged brown, which is way beyond the third of just that is classified as grasslands, we're looking now at about 2/3 of the world's land, is seasonal rainfall, which is predominantly the land where grass plants play a major role in the stability of the soil. Many of those are forests, dry deciduous forests, etc., savannas, but it's the vast part of the world. And that vast part of the world is where we are seeing what is called desertification, which really is rainfall becoming non-effective because of our management, and where we're seeing the bulk, the greater bulk of the soil destruction. Some years ago, I followed a speaker, Elizabeth Sartoris, and I loved it because she showed a picture of the world from space and made the comment that if we looked at ourselves from space, we would describe humans as a desert-making species. And it's pretty true. Now, we all know that the belief of society, not just now, but for thousands of years, and thus the belief of all institutions, is that this brown zone, let me call it, is desertifying, that's most of the world, because of livestock. Now, that deep belief is leading, as you know, tragically, to highly intelligent people and a major movement to these people to become vegetarians because they care. They're good people who care, and they want to take action. So one way of taking action is to become vegetarians or vegans, and they're doing so, and they're showing that they care. Another thing that's happening, or when we look at this brown area, if I might put it this way, if we're going to understand what's happening there, and most of you in the room know this, these are the environments from which vast herds too big to be able to describe today, billions of large animals evolved and co-developed with the soils, with the climate, with the soil life, with all the vegetation, not one before the other, but together, all co-evolved in an enormous, mind-boggling synergy in the whole evolutionary process that's been going on for billions of years. Now, in this country, for example, just to try to give you an image of that, it is said that we have 11 large mammal species in North America today. Well, there used to be apparently 40 more large mammal species, including here in the Bay Area. We just can't even conceive of that today. when we think we have a lot of animals today. I want to quote two quotes. This quote is from somebody writing 70 years before I was born, in 1860. This is George Mossop, a young man describing what he was seeing. "The scene which met my eyes the next morning is beyond my power to describe. Game, game everywhere, as far as the eye could see, all on the move, grazing. The game did not appear to be moving. The impression I received was that the earth was doing so, carrying the game with it. They were in such vast numbers. Hundreds of thousands of blesbok, springbok, wildebeest, and many others were all around us." That's in Africa, and that's only 70 years before I was born. This is from the United States. "The great herd on the Arkansas River through which I passed was from my own observation not less than 25 miles wide, and from reports of hunters and others, it was about 5 days in passing a given point, or not less than 50 miles deep. From the top of Pawnee Rock, I could see from 6 to 10 miles in almost every direction. This whole vast space was covered with buffalo," that's one species only, "looking at a distance like one compact mass, the visual angle not permitting the ground to be seen. I have seen such a sight a great number of times, but never on so large a scale." That was written 1889, only 40 years before I was born. I'm just giving you an idea that these are written history, recent. When this all co-evolved, there was far more. These were remnants they're describing. When those buffalo were being describing, that was a remnant. There had been 40 other species here. So today we have no conception of what these grasslands of the world evolved, the conditions they evolved under, because it was mostly destroyed before we existed. Right, so looking at that, then, as you know, we're a tool-using animal, and we're going to have to put this right somehow, the people that want to take action. Now, being a tool-using animal, if we go to the mass of the population, the people that we've got to break through to, the young people, if you ask them how many tools we have, they would say thousands. We have such a plethora of tools with which to manipulate our environment, do things. No, we don't. We have 3. If you break them down into categories, we have 3 tools. We have technology, all the marvels of technology, from our first technology, which was sticks and stones, to our developing technology after we discovered fire and went into the copper, the bronze, and the Iron Age. Everything in this room today, including the clothing you have, was only made possible after fire. So for most of human existence, 99.9% or more of human existence, we only had 2 tools, some form of technology or fire. And the only other tool we've ever had was the idea, the concept of resting the environment, conservation. So we have 3 tools. Now, that is why I asked in the TED talk, you might recall, I gave that talk on desertification in the world and asked the question, what are we going to do after describing desertification and how it was occurring? And that question still remains unanswered in the world. What are we going to do to address desertification given the tools that we have? If we think about the tools we have and understand that desertification is occurring because these animals have gone and the way our ecosystem functions is now malfunctioning on 2/3 of the world's land because of the lack of animals and the oxidation process that I described in that talk, right? So if we think about that, no technology even imaginable in science fiction can replace the role of animals dunging, trampling, urinating, grazing, moving, and their predators on 2/3 of the world. That level of disturbance happening routinely but periodically in the world. Now, if we think about fire, obviously it can't, because it's rapid oxidation. It does keep grasslands alive while they slowly desertify, but it puts the carbon in the air. There's no way in the world that fire can replace biological functioning of animals. And then the only other tool we're left with is, as you know, the idea of resting the environment. Now, this is a wonderful tool for anywhere in the green zone or the oceans. It is the most powerful action humans can take, probably, to restore biodiversity and full functioning of our environment and our soils. But over the brown area of the world, it is probably the most destructive thing we can do. And that's why in the TED talk, I put this picture of a national park in New Mexico. That is the result of removing animals completely. There have been no livestock or any significant animal life there for a long time. Now, when we look at this idea of conservation, it isn't just in the United States that that's happening. As some of you hub leaders know, when you were at your hub leaders boot camp with us at Dimangombe, the Africa Center, we took you into nearby national park, and we're going to be doing that routinely now, because if we look at our national parks around us, this is what they look like. That is not what a national park should look like, but that is what is happening with the concept of leave it to nature, or resting it, even in national parks with the remnant game that we have today. So we're going to have to change our thinking. That's another view in a national park. All right, so the three tools we have cannot do what is needed. And now you know why I keep saying there is only one option. Now, I know that if you say this, like I do, you will be criticized for it. Because what person says there's only one option, particularly if you are a scientist, saying only one option? Well, if you say livestock can solve this problem, you imply that there's another option. What is it? There isn't another option. If there is, somebody in the world needs to come up with it. Now, other options are suggested, and this is unfortunate because people are implying that there are options. Now, these are coming from good people. One of them is planting trees. There are good people. Awards are being given for it, for planting trees. If you can plant enough trees, you'll solve this problem. Yes, if you can plant a lot of trees, you'll pull a lot of carbon out of the air, but what will you do about desertification? Nothing. Most of the land that's the brown in the desertifying areas is 300 millimeters or less of rainfall. Can't grow trees, much of that land. Now, where people have planted them, in United Arab Emirates, they spent $30 billion planting trees, irrigating them, etc. But you can see the desert just blowing through. So planting trees is a wonderful idea. There's nothing wrong with planting trees, but it's not a solution to desertification and poverty and starving mothers and children and all the things that we're dealing with. Another of the things that's suggested is using technology to build swales, etc., and harvest water that's running off desertifying land to grow crops and things in oases. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful idea. But when you put it forward as a solution to desertification, no. We have got to deal with billions of hectares of land, not harvest water off big chunks for little oases that'll sustain people for a few more years. People were doing that in the Nabatean civilization 2,000 years ago, and it didn't work. So these are not solutions when they are put forward as solutions. Now, another one from good people, all of these are good ideas, is producing biochar. Biochar is a wonderful thing. We should produce lots of biochar. There's lots of evidence of the good it can do, but it cannot reverse desertification over billions of hectares of land. That is the task we have to face if we're going to save civilization as we know it. So while these suggestions that I've mentioned that are the common ones coming up of planting trees, harvesting water, biochar, etc., they don't deal with either the symptoms of desertification, the poverty, the starving children, etc., or the cause, but they're good practices where they're appropriate, but not solutions. Now, when it comes to trying to solve this problem, once I realized in the 1960s that how wrong I was, because I had disliked livestock intensely, and that we had no option but livestock, then the big dilemma, as I explained briefly in the TED Talk, was how on earth do you do it? We'd had 10,000 years of extremely knowledgeable pastoralists whose whole culture is their livestock. And they had created the great man-made deserts of antiquity. And if you look at modern pastoralism, whether it's northern Kenya or Sudan or Namibia or anywhere you want to look at it, the land is still desertifying. There is nowhere that it's not desertifying under modern pastoralism. So we couldn't just bunch and move the animals as they'd done for 10,000 years. Then we'd had 100 years of grazing systems, fencing, range science, whole dozens and dozens of grazing systems, rotations, etc., and those accelerated desertification. You can see that in Texas and New Mexico and Arizona, Colorado. You can see it in California. That accelerated desertification. We could see it in Africa and Australia. So what were we to do? That was a tremendous, real problem in the 1960s. Now, as you know, historically, we solved that problem by breaking off totally from that mentality of grazing systems, rotations, everything, and really reverted to a planning process based on 300 years of experience in an entirely different field, where people had had for 300 years to deal with extremely complicated situations, constantly changing goalposts, and just took their experience, adapted it to ranching, pastoralism, etc. And that gave us what we know as holistic planned grazing today, and that worked right away. Now, that process goes way beyond, as many of you in the room know, beyond just integrating the cattle or the sheep or the goats or whatever with the pastures and stopping the overgrazing, etc. That goes right into integrating the livestock with any other land uses, whatever those are, crop growing or ecotourism, hunting safaris as we have to do, or anything else that's going on the land, fully integrating them with wildlife, etc., but also bringing in all the social, cultural, economic complexity. And that's what led us from that, discovering how to do that, led us eventually to realize, oh my goodness, we can do this from the household to government policy. Even with no cattle involved, we can use some of this thinking. So it goes way beyond anything people are dreaming of with mob grazing or rotational grazing, any grazing system. But somehow we've got to get that simple idea over to people. Now, why is such a simple idea not moving? I have pondered this, many of you have probably pondered this. When something is so simple, has been so simple for so long, has been demonstrated over and over and over again, replicated endlessly everywhere anybody's ever done it. If we get everybody that has practiced holistic plan grazing has seen good results, even where they've practiced it pretty badly, as we have at times, on Divangambi. We still see good results. Now, when that is happening and it's not spreading, why is that? Now, there are a number of reasons that it's not. One reason is the criticisms, because it is subject to a lot of criticism in peer-reviewed literature, etc. Now, if we think about that for a moment, we need criticism. I personally have invited criticism from the earliest days and got a lot of it, and it was so helpful. Without criticism, I don't see how anything advances, science or management or anything else. So we've always invited criticism, and it helped enormously in the earlier days. Now, what is wrong and not helpful today is criticism that bears no relationship at all to what we're doing. How do you deal with that sort of criticism? That is difficult. If I look at some of that, and you're all made aware of it from time to time, a good example, and I hate naming a person, but I need to name this paper, is David Brisky, professor at Texas A&M. I'm quoting him because he produced a paper citing many others and trying to condense the criticisms. When you look at all of that, which is cited often and quoted often, and I've read it, there is nothing that bears any relationship at all to what we're doing. So what do you call that? Is that criticism? Or is it alleged criticism? I don't know. But if you say alleged, then you have to explain it. So these are the things that are not helpful, is criticism that isn't actually referring to the work that we do at all. Now, unfortunately, that sort of criticism, those sort of views, are picked up by the social media, the press, environmental organizations, funding organizations, development agencies. They all pick up that, and what do you think it does? It slows progress. And if you try to answer it, you're said to be defensive. So this is hindering us. We need to just be aware of it. I don't have solutions to it. I'm just pointing out it's one of the things that's slowing us up. So right currently, when it comes to criticism, we're in a position where there is no current up-to-date criticism that I'm aware of, and we need to now keep inviting that. We need all of us to keep encouraging researchers, anybody, to keep criticizing, keep us on our toes. Only through constant criticism and changing do we keep advancing. If we don't, we stagnate. So we need to keep inviting that. Now, the other thing that is slowing progress, and I'm very concerned with progress because the rate at which environmental degradation is showing up now around the world is accelerating, as is our population and our problems. Now, the other things that are slowing progress are what I call distracting side issues. Now, there are three main ones. The one is the growing movement of vegans and vegetarians that I mentioned, of very, very intelligent people, a growing movement of concerned people saying that we should not eat meat. The second is the issue of methane production. The number of times this comes up, the amount of methane that livestock produce, particularly cattle. And then the third is the constant questioning and asking for data about the amount of carbon that the soil can absorb. Now, why do I call these distracting side issues? Let me explain that very clearly to you. Assume for a moment that in the world we take the next 25 years and spend billions of dollars, and we use those dollars, and many, many people, most of the world, become vegans and vegetarians and no longer kill animals, and they're going to get all their food, we're going to get all our food and all the fiber and the clothing from fossil fuels and all the food from plants. and we're not going to get any fibers or anything from animals, no more leather, all this stuff, wool. We're going to be vegetarian. Now, let's assume that. Let's assume that we spend billions of dollars and we prove that cattle put out 10 times the methane they do. We prove it. And let's assume that we prove conclusively that the world's grasslands can absorb no carbon at all. None. Now, that's cost us billions of dollars. We've concluded those three things. We're 25 years from now. Now my question to you is, what are you going to do? What are you going to do about starving mothers and children, increasing droughts and floods, frequency, poverty, violence, recruitment to Al-Qaeda and dissident organizations, boatloads of people drowning in the Mediterranean trying to reach Europe, all due to desertification? What are we going to do about them? You have no option but to use livestock. Now do you see why can that light go up in the audience? Suddenly I'm looking at no audience. You disappeared at that dramatic moment. But do you see the point I'm making? We would have wasted 25 years, 1 billion people or more would have died, suffering, dying, wildlife would have gone. To what avail? These are side issues. If we're going to get serious about climate change, if the younger generation are going to get serious about their lives and doing, as Daniela called for, a better job than we've done, they're going to have to face these issues. And we've got to stop these distracting side issues. That's what I believe. And I get desperately worried when I watch all this delaying, because I'm terribly conscious that since I first started really spelling it out, that livestock have to be used, and here's how it can be done, and showing it and proving it to everybody's satisfaction. At that time, that was over 50 years ago. So we've already wasted 50 years with criticisms that weren't criticisms and trying to get the information out to the public. We didn't have social networking. We didn't have these advantages we have today. So I'm probably more conscious than most of you are in the room, purely because of my age now. I'm in the departure lounge, and I've spent my whole damn life trying to have a better world. And as I have fewer and fewer years, I get more and more anxious for you. I won't be here. But it matters to me. It really matters. Okay, so I'd like to end now really by talking a little bit about leadership. To bring about the change that we're going to need in the world needs leadership, we know that. But the change we're trying to bring about, if we're going to get serious about our lives and climate and so on, the change is from vilifying livestock to recognizing that our management was at fault, not the livestock. And if we can bring that initial change, then other things will flow. That is the main blockage to general acceptance of holistic management. No question about it. We're concentrating on the grasslands of the world because that's our Achilles heel. That's where we can get the maximum result, quickest time. That's where most of the suffering and violence is happening. Right now, the leadership that will require cannot come from politicians or organizations. I think that's being increasingly acknowledged. So where's it going to come from? And the answer is you, ordinary people. You are the leaders, the people that are beginning to change. There are no others. And it is you, whether you're housewives, gardeners, fishermen, businessmen, philanthropists, scientists, whatever, you're still individual human beings. And it's in that individual capacity that you become leaders, because institutions cannot, politicians cannot, etc. Now, this is where our hubs become so vital, I believe, and why I'm so personally, wholeheartedly behind this hub movement that Daniela, Trey, Chris, and others are leading today. This hub movement really is, as you know, locally led, locally managed places where people can get together as human beings, regardless of what walk of life they come from, begin collaborating, learning, etc. together. And that way, spreading the knowledge, getting it into countries like Mexico, where you already have really active hubs beginning to influence government, etc. That's what is needed. Ordinary people doing that, whatever their walk of life, collaborating, pulling together. But the essence of it is your movement. It's your hubs. We're using the name Savory Hubs. I actually get embarrassed my own name being used. But really, the Savory Institute can only serve you, provide the services you need for the hub movement, which has got to be your movement working. So they can provide services and will to link you all, connect you all, quality of materials, providing really up-to-date trainers of your own, in your own language, your own areas, and all of these things. All right, so that hub-lead movement of the world, I think, is wonderful in that we can now begin to get these centers around the world where people are just collaborating as humans, regardless of whether they're researchers, bureaucrats, it doesn't matter. They're humans getting together, beginning to manage holistically, spread the knowledge. Because most people are good, most people are trying to do the right thing, and we just need to start pulling together, not with the solution, because we don't have it, but with a way to begin to work out solutions with that holistic framework that we've been able to develop so far. So now let me just end on a personal note. 60 years ago, I hated livestock more than any vegan in the world. I'm not joking. I was fanatical. I was worse than any fanatic you've got in this country. I'm not joking. I was prepared to shoot goddamn ranchers because they were raping the land. I was taught that, I believed it, I saw it, and that's how I was. When I learned how wrong I was scientifically, I changed. I think the whole world can change. I think others can change. I changed because I loved the land, I loved the wildlife, I loved people more than I hated cattle. And hatred isn't a basis to work on. We need to work on science, love, caring, other things. So my hope is that others will begin to change as I was able to. It's not easy, but we can change. I'm eternally grateful to those of you, many in the audience, who are already focusing on the food, health, nutrition, etc., as Rob and others are doing. I'm so excited about that because that is getting through to city people. If we don't get through to the city populations, we're doomed because they control everything now. And that's a wonderful movement, I believe, in the right direction to get through to city folks the importance and connect the dots, health, food, land, city, etc. We will be running a workshop later this weekend on cities beginning to be managed holistically, and I hope some of you will attend that. Now, to my really very dear friends who care very much by taking actions become vegans, and I've been amazed at how many people I really care for that I've met in recent times are vegans, and they're just wonderful people. And to those people I would just appeal to them to think more deeply and to think and have more empathy for other people in the world who don't have the choice of foods. It's only when we're wealthy and have a big choice that we can pick and choose what we eat necessarily. But many of those starving mothers and children, etc., in this great brown area of the world there, all right, don't have a choice. 95% of that land, rainfall is too low to grow trees, produce crops. It can only feed people from animals. So if we sit in the wealthy green parts and can choose our diets, but it's adversely affecting them, that's what I mean when I'm appealing to those friends of mine to have empathy for other people too, other parts of the world, because what we say and do in America can have a profound influence, certainly on funding and everything else, and policies. To the many good people who are philanthropists and are with their wealth trying to support good in the world, which is wonderful, I appeal to them to think more deeply. And the reason I say this is because almost all of these good people are today, out of the goodness of their hearts, but unknowingly, are funding Band-Aids and dealing with symptoms. And so if they can just think more deeply about this and begin to fund solutions, and people that are working on solutions and not Band-Aids, because I can assure you that the billions of dollars that are going to go in, as I mentioned earlier, to things like the new UN development goals, etc., those are all just Band-Aids. And more people are suffering and dying as we treat Band-Aids instead of the root causes of the problem that and can feed people, etc., through doing that. So, as I said, at my age I'm in the departure lounge, but I would die very happy if I could just see some of those things beginning to happen that I've just mentioned and spoken of somewhat personally. So now please let me finally say, have fun the next few days. Welcome you here. I hope you'll have a lot of fun, meeting a lot of good people, wonderful people, some great practitioners, speakers. It's going to be great. I've already enjoyed this evening a lot and what I saw today. So have a lot of fun, meeting with a lot of people, and hopefully we'll go on to do more and more conferences and more expanding the choir and getting through to the people we really need to do by the millions in the cities. But this is a good start, so have fun. If I could, I'd like to paraphrase a statement from Churchill's in another profound and dangerous time when he said words that you might know the original, I do, but I've changed them here. Never in the history has the future of so many depended on so few to provide leadership. Thank you, the few. Thank you. Thank you.